Meanwhile, several new voting laws recently enacted in the United States throughout the country, sparking controversy. Here are the 14 states where new voting laws have been passed. From barring early voting to restricting where people can vote to requiring people to provide government-issued photo identification, some voters and civil rights activists are concerned that one of America's most fundamental rights is under attack. But proponents of the new rules say it will prevent voter fraud, but critics say it alienates and excludes a very significant portion of American citizens, these people being mostly minorities that tend to advocate that tend to vote Democrats. So what is really behind these new laws, and could they potentially affect the outcome of the election? Well, here to debate the pros and cons, I'm joined now by Seton Motley, president of Less Government, and from our Los Angeles studio, investigative journalist Brad Friedman. Welcome to the both of you. Brad, I'm going to start with you. What is the problem with requiring people to show photo IDs at the polls?
Well, the problem is that there are millions of Americans who simply do not have them, and it's not equally spread among all voters. In fact, minorities, elderly students, and so forth are far more likely to not have the type of photo ID, state-issued photo ID, that's required by these new laws. These new laws have been put in place, by the way, in order to keep people from voting, keep legal voters from casting their legal vote despite a dearth of problems with voter fraud at the polling place. That's the only type of voter fraud that can be stopped by these polling place photo ID restrictions. So you're talking about keeping potentially tens, if not hundreds of thousands of legal voters who have been able to vote without a problem for decades from being able to cast their legal vote under these restrictive new laws passed by Republicans.
Seton, what do you make of that argument that this new law will exclude thousands of voters here in the U.S.?
Oh, well, the tens of thousands number is completely made up. What we've seen time and time and time again, and the Acorn scandal was just the tip of the iceberg that broke this down, that broke this in, is the combination of casting a provisional ballot at the polling place when you don't have a photo ID or you can't prove you've lived somewhere, and then matching that up with the fraudulent registrations that Acorn and other groups have registered in the tens and hundreds of thousands. So that's the kind of voter ID fraud that actually transpires in large numbers, and that's the kind of voter fraud that a photo ID requirement largely eliminates, and that's what they've been fighting. Because as we know, Acorn was a Democrat operation, registering people that then helped illegally elect Democrats. So that's the partisan battle we're fighting at this point.
Brad, I'll let you respond to that.
Yeah. There's nothing partisan about this other than where you've got Republicans trying to keep voters from being able to cast their legal vote. In the case of Acorn, we're talking about registration fraud that was carried out by a handful of Acorn workers who was discovered by Acorn themselves and turned into officials.
Handful? There were 18 states
phony registrations ever cast votes. You got to keep that in mind.
It's a combination. I just said. You're ignoring what I just said.
There is Seton.
You're ignoring what I just said. It's a combination of the illegal registrations and the illegal provision.
Do you mind letting me finish what I was saying?
You're ignoring what I'm saying.
Do you mind letting me?
I'm just going to jump in there.
Do you mind letting me finish what I was saying? There is not evidence of a single fraudulent vote ever cast vis-a-vis an improper registration by an Acorn worker. That is simply a canard. Where is it, Seton?
There were 18. There were prosecutions in 18 states for that.
Just a moment,
There were 18 states being prosecuted for that when Acorn went down.
I do want to ask.
There is no prosecution against any case of voter fraud for any fraudulent registration by an Acorn worker.
You're wrong.
Brad, I'm just going to jump in there because I do want to ask how this law can be considered discriminatory if it does apply to everybody across the board, no matter who you are. If you're a voter, you're required to show this ID. So it doesn't discriminate in that way.
Yeah. Well, great question. Just yesterday, the Department of Justice rejected a Texas polling place photo ID restriction because it found that Hispanic voters are anywhere from 46% to 120% more likely to be lacking the type of photo ID that is required over non-Hispanic voters.
Could it be because they're here illegally?
In South Carolina, where black voters are 20% more likely to not have the type of photo ID required than non-African American voters. So we see this same pattern all over the country, and of course Republicans know this. That's why they're passing these laws.
Seton, go ahead there.
Perhaps in Texas, the Hispanics are 126% more likely not to have photo ID because a great many of them are here illegally and shouldn't be voting anyway. These numbers are
these are legal voters, Seton.
Can I finish?
These are legal voters, Seton.
No. What they're looking at is they're fudging the numbers. They cherry pick certain populations to look at for one number, then they cherry pick another number to look at for different numbers. They're looking at registered voters. They're looking at total population. They're not even looking at likely voters, which are the people that actually go vote. Is it racist for bars?
These are actually.
Is it racist for bars to require ID? Is it racist for bars to require ID for purchase?
Okay.
Is it racist for prescription for pharmacies to require ID?
Let me answer that, Seton, let me answer your question, okay? In Texas, we're not fudging any numbers because those are the numbers that were supplied by the state of Texas to the Department of Justice. They're going by their own numbers. Those are currently registered, legally registered voters that we're talking about, okay? So what is your question about
are bars racist for requiring photo ID for purchase? Are pharmacies racist for requiring photo ID to fill a prescription? Are they racist?
These are
they
ridiculous
racist?
points. I've never said that any of this was racist.
Sure it is. You're saying we're doing this to discriminate against minorities.
I do want to jump in there because here's somebody else who has come into contact with the system and has been denied the right to vote. I want to play this clip from you. This is actually from a veteran. He is from Tennessee. He's trying to use his voter registration card and he is denied. Let's take a look at how it went down.
This is my voter registration card? Yes, sir. I've used this for 37 years. This was good enough for my father. It was good enough for my grandfather. And I refuse to show you a picture ID.
That's fine. Would you like to vote provisional ballot?
No, I do not. You don't get me right. I object to the law.
Now, so what's your response to that? Here we have a veteran. He's being denied the right to vote. He said he's been using that form of ID for decades, and here
the law has changed. He's being obstinate. He's being obstinate. He can go into a bar and bitch and moan that he can't get a beer without an ID, but that's the law. He can go into a pharmacy and bitch that he can't get a prescription filled, but that's the law. We want to cut down on fraudulent prescription fillings. We want to cut down on fraudulent underage drinking, and we want to cut down on fraudulent voting. And photo ID helps in that regard in all three instances.
No, actually it doesn't, and the Bush administration itself, its own DOJ, was unable to find any instance of in-person impersonation at the polling place.
Have you not watched the James O'Keefe videos?
Ferreting this out.
Have you watched the James O'Keefe videos? Where he walks into New Hampshire primary and Vermont primary and gets handed ballot after ballot
where James O'Keefe committed voter fraud himself. Of course I've seen that.
Well, of course, because he's proving you can commit voter fraud. You doofus. He's proving you can commit voter fraud. Time and time again. What are you talking about?
Seton, I do want to ask you because
you can also.
It has been proven time and time again.
You can also rob a bank with a rubber gun. That doesn't mean that, we have to keep everybody out of the bank.
You can't simultaneously accuse James O'Keefe of voter fraud and say voter fraud isn't happening.
All right, Seton, I do want to ask you because it is proven that the people who are going to be prevented from voting are African Americans, are Latinos, are minorities.
If they don't get a $10 photo ID.
And these are people that typically do vote Democrat. So this law would benefit Republicans, presumably, and in that way it could kind of
if they don't go get a $10 photo ID, which most of them have anyway. It's very easy to get.
So how many thousands of voters are you okay with disenfranchising?
I'm okay with disenfranchising the Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and Dick Tracy that Acorn registered. Yeah, I'm just fine with disenfranchising them.
Have Dick Tracy or Donald Duck ever voted in any election?
Ohio.
Seton?
Ohio in 2006.
They have, really?
Yes.
When did Donald Duck vote in Ohio?
It was Dick Tracy, Mary Poppins, and I'm trying to remember the names now. It was Dick Tracy, Mary Poppins, and my favorite of all time,
Mickey Mouse.
Jive Turkey.
Mickey Mouse.
And Jive Turkey. Mickey Mouse was in Florida because of Orlando.
All right.
You're making things up, Seton.
I do want to bring some
Facts
of
are
these
stubborn
statistics,
things.
some of these statistics to light here. At least 51 million, that's nearly 1 in 4 voters are not registered to vote. 1 in 8 registrations are significantly inaccurate or no longer valid. And millions of people that are registered to vote, they're registered to vote in more than one state. So Brad, doesn't that show that there are some problems within the voting system and they do need to be addressed?
Oh, yes. There are huge problems within the voting system. Add to that list you just read the fact that citizens are not able to oversee their own results due to the privatization, the corporatization of our election system, our voting machines, and so forth. There's lots of problems. For example, Mitt Romney apparently voted in January of 2010 in Massachusetts, even though he didn't own a home there until July of 2010.
So, Brad, what is your
Mitt Romney
proposal?
committed voter fraud.
Propose that we fix this problem then?
Well, there is a lot of things that you can do. Unfortunately, what is being done, what the Republicans are trying to do here, has nothing to do with solving any of these problems. That's why Mitt Romney was able to commit voter fraud. That's why the Secretary of State of Indiana, the first state in the union to institute photo ID restrictions in 2008, was found guilty last month of 3 felony counts of voter fraud. That's the Secretary of State of Indiana. But it was not done at the polling place. People just don't do voter impersonation at the polling place.
Have you not watched the videos? Have you not watched the videos? Have you not watched the O'Keefe videos in New Hampshire and Vermont, where he time and time again walked right in, got ballots for names that were either dead or not them?
Right.
That's voter fraud at the polling place.
I hope you're calling, like the Republican mayor in New Hampshire, for O'Keefe to be arrested for committing voter fraud.
He never voted.
Look,
He never voted. He said he went out to his car to get his ID.
All right, last question here.
It doesn't matter. He broke the law in New Hampshire. There's a lot of
speculation that this law is politically motivated because of the fact that it does benefit the Republicans, basically, because it would exclude a lot of Democratic voters. What is your response to that there is political motivation behind it?
It's not my fault that Democrats cheat more than Republicans, and we're precluding them from voting by requiring voter IDs at the voting places.
All right.
Where's your evidence for that, Seton?
I was going to ask you the same thing. I don't know.
Well, you just said Democrats are going to be precluded from voting by requiring photo IDs.
By them not having IDs, does that mean that they're cheating the system?
Well, it means that if the voting is overwhelmingly helped by not having a photo ID for Democrats, that pretty much leads to that there's some cheating going on that benefits Democrats, a la Acorn.
What does not having a photo ID have to do with cheating, and what does Acorn
what I'm saying is requiring a photo ID that cuts down on Democrat votes.
All right.
You can easily draw the conclusion that not requiring a photo ID helps Democrat voters.
Obviously a very controversial topic as a lot of these new voter laws go into effect. It's questionable as to how it will impact the outcome of the election. But thank you so much for participating in this debate. That was investigative journalist Brad Friedman in our Los Angeles studio, and Seton Motley, president of Less Government here in D.C.